Okay, so in this first kind of mini lecture, we're going to be covering the ways of knowing. Now, this content is content that is sort of, in my opinion, kind of talked around in your textbook, but I think it's honestly pretty basic sort of information that I think helps us to kind of frame this first module and really thinking about a very simple question, which is the question, how do we know anything? And so the answer to how do we know anything, that seems like a really kind of deep question, and it is, and especially for us as Christians, I think is a question that sort of resonates with us because we have this understanding of faith, right? And faith is the evidence of things hoped for and unseen. But while that's certainly true for our faith, in a research class, we're also going to ask ourselves, how do we know anything for sure? Well, we often think about this in terms of 5 different ways of knowing. Those 5 different ways of knowing: authority, tradition, experience, intuition, and then lastly, the scientific method. Obviously, the crux of this class is going to be talking about that last way of knowing. How do we investigate things scientifically? But I think that sometimes making sense of that scientific method and that research method, it helps to think about all of the other ways of knowing first. So first way of knowing is what we call knowledge by authority. So knowledge by authority. So some stuff that we think we know, if we really think about it and someone says, how do you know that? This is the type of knowledge that's just passed down from experts or authorities. So, how do you know that? Well, because scientists say that that's true, because expert practitioners say that that's true, because my teacher said that that's true in a particular field. So anytime that we answer a question like that, where someone says, well, how do you know that that's true? And the answer is because so-and-so said so, that's knowledge by authority. Now, knowledge by authority has value. There are definitely some things in life that we know because someone told us that that's the case. We just want to be cautious about anything that is our method of way of knowing, because we have to be open to questioning the authority or the accuracy of authority figures, because no one's perfect. And we want to be especially cautious and skeptical about media as a source of evidence, right? So if how do you know? Well, because, Tom Brokaw, Brian Williams said that it was true, we may want to question those things. But there are definitely some things in our lives that we know because someone, an expert, told us they were true. The second way of knowing is knowledge by tradition. So knowledge by tradition is the kind of stuff where when someone says, well, how do you know that that's true? The answer is it's just kind of been passed down, right? So this type of knowledge has been passed down through tradition. This is an accepted way of doing things. This is, we hear this a lot, especially once you get into the field. You'll hear people say, well, that's the way we've always done it. Anytime that the answer is that's the way we've always done it, we're talking about knowledge by tradition. And this picture that you see down there in the corner of the ham is to remind me to tell you a story. Sometimes I'll put little clip art pictures down there that don't mean anything to you, but that remind me to tell you a story. So knowledge by tradition. It's one of my favorite stories. It's a silly example, but it's the story of, of making Easter dinner, and, a girl making Easter dinner for the first time, for her fiance and her family. And she is making her Easter dinner, and she puts her ham into the ham roaster, and she cuts off the end of the ham, and she puts it into the ham roaster, and her fiance says, why'd you cut off the end of the ham? Like, that end of the ham, it's my favorite part. And she says, well, that's the way you make ham. He's like, no, you don't cut off the ham, right? The end's the good part. She says, well, Mom, she looks at her mom and she says, Mom, tell him that's the way you make ham, right? You cut off the end of the ham. Her mom says, yeah. And the fiance pushes again. No, we don't do it that way. Why do we cut off the ham? I don't know. That's the way we do it. So they call Grandma. And they say, Grandma, John wants to know why you cut off the end of the ham. Tell him that's the way you make ham. And Grandma starts to laugh. And Grandma says, That's not the way you make ham. My roaster just wasn't big enough. And everyone realizes that for 3 generations now, they thought that cutting off the end of that ham was a part of making traditional Easter dinner, when really it just became a way things are always done. The third type of knowledge is knowledge by experience. So this is knowledge that we gain by doing things. Through experience, we absolutely gain knowledge. We also gain biases. In social work, we actually have adapted a model called evidence-based practice. You see it down here in the corner. And evidence-based practice actually doesn't originate in social work. It originates in the medical field. And this was the medical field recognizing that coming up with the right answer for how to do things is actually a combination of what does the evidence say. We'll spend a lot of time this semester talking about what does the evidence say, but that coming up with the right answer is really the intersection of what does the evidence say, what does the patient want, and what is our clinical experience. And that clinical experience piece is something we call practice wisdom. That's knowledge by experience. There are lots of things that we do in our life that when we really ask ourselves the question, how do we know that that's true? It's because I've experienced it. I've seen that it works, right? That's knowledge by experience. And that absolutely has value. Then the fourth type of knowledge is actually kind of related to that, but it's something called knowledge by intuition. So this type of knowledge stems from that sort of gut feeling, that subconscious process. It just feels like the right thing to do. It just feels like this is true. We don't want to confuse this with professional judgment, but they do have some overlap. And this is where it's important to talk about 2 key research terms that do come up in your textbook. And that's the difference between inductive and deductive reasoning. Inductive and deductive reasoning. So those are 2 things that are really important to understand, especially in the context of how you are likely to become involved in research. Remember, I said in the introductory video that, bachelor's level students are not really going to go out into the world and be creators of research, but you will get involved in research. And the way that you'll get involved in research is actually the intersection of knowledge by intuition and experience, which we've talked about, and the scientific method that we're getting to in a second. And here's how. So the difference between inductive and deductive reasoning is whether things go from specific to general or general to specific. And there's a couple different graphics here on the screen to help you understand. So inductive reasoning is reasoning that goes from specific case to a general principle. So specific to general, it goes from narrow to broad. So inductive reasoning is honestly the way a lot of you are going to develop your research proposals. That what's your thing? Remember that question? So that we're going to come back to in a second. So inductive reasoning for lots of us, especially in social work, this is how we arrive at our research. We observe something in a client or in our own lives. And we say, this is true for Jenny. I wonder if this is true for everybody else. So it's starting with Jenny, a specific case, and then it's saying, I wonder if this is true for everybody. That's inductive reasoning. So any type of research that originates with kind of an observation about something in society, and then broadens out to, is this true for everybody? We'll talk about generalization. That's inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is exactly the opposite. Deductive reasoning says the literature says this, right? There's a theory about this. The literature says, all autistic kids benefit from play therapy. I wonder if that applies to Jenny, right? So now we're going from general to specific. General to specific. It's deductive reasoning. Both absolutely valid venues for kind of arriving at research questions, but an important difference to understand. I would say that generally speaking, most people use inductive reasoning to build a research agenda. So then lastly, let's talk about the scientific method. So obviously the scientific method is the crux of what we are going to be doing in the rest of this class, right? So it may be that the answer to what's your thing with the answer to, what are you passionate about in criminal justice or in substance abuse or in social work or whatever field it is that you're in, that comes from a very personal place. I've observed this in my own life or my brother's life or my mom's life or things like that. And then that's going to get you into your research agenda. And so how we do that is the scientific method. Important to remember, first and foremost, that in the scientific method, all knowledge is open to question. All knowledge is tentative. Nothing is final. That quote by Albert Einstein that you see at the bottom of this slide, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. It's this idea that the scientific method, that research is dynamic, that research is constantly changing, that we have to replicate things and observe them and be objective and be transparent so that we can question things, so that we can continue to ask, is this still true? It's important to understand that the scientific method is incredibly rigorous, and that it is the way that we arrive at how we know that things are true, but also to recognize that the scientific method is a continual opportunity to find new knowledge. And that brings us to the crux of the end of Module 1, and that's what's your thing. So if you haven't done it already, please visit the Moodle page and find the VoiceThread link that I've started. You'll see me again and hear me talk, again introducing this idea of what's your thing, and then you will post and start to share with your classmates by way of introduction. It's a good way for us to get to know each other, and I'm looking forward to seeing your faces. What's your thing? What are you interested in criminal justice? And then we'll work together to build those things into a strong research question and a strong research agenda moving forward. So how do we know anything? Sometimes by authority, sometimes by experience, sometimes by intuition, and in this class, through the rigorous scientific method. So I look forward to hearing what you all are interested in studying this semester.